Has Ukraine officially liberated Robotyne? And are they also launching operations in Crimea? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's August 24th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first taking a look at the control map. The biggest update, of course, is outside of Robotyne. And as we talked about yesterday, it sounded like Russian forces had just abandoned operating in Robotyne entirely. And you see Ukrainian forces advancing, liberating the entire town. What's also interesting and worth pointing out is that you can see that Ukrainian forces are really pushing to try to roll up this Russian second line of defense, or really, I'd say probably the break and roll up this first line of defense here. You can see them trying to get it up here. They also, I believe, are trying to push in this line as well. But as we zoom out, we can see that Russia's backup line, so to speak, seems to be primarily here. These areas seem much more isolated, right? But there is clearly a single defensive line stretching across behind the front. So it's got also some secondary positions here and here, as well as encircling Tokmak. But this is, I think, a good sign for Ukraine that they are in places south of the primary defensive line. They can get behind it. That makes a tremendous difference, and we're seeing Ukraine start to do that, right? So when we look over at the combat map, we can see in a little more fidelity what I'm talking about. And you're seeing here that, again, this reports as of 6 hours ago that Ukrainian offensive operations have had success near Novodanyelivka and Novoprokopivka. And these are interesting because they are not pushing further south. This is what you would think of when you think of major breakthrough, right? Russian forces, of course, retreating from Robotyne. But instead, they're pushing east and west. Well, the reason is because east and west allows them to assault some of these entrenched Russian positions from the flanks. They finally have a flanking shot on some of these trench works. And once you're behind a trench work, that's sort of the trade-off with trenches, right? Is that they're linear. And they're meant to provide a tremendous volume of protected fire from a frontal assault. And so as long as that trench remains intact and not flanked, you're okay. Once someone shows up from the flanks, you can see that a trench has a geometry problem. You can only have one soldier here at this flank, and they may face an entire flank assault. So these defensive positions, right? And you can imagine the trench is going to have barbed wire, dragon's teeth, minefields. Well, from the flank, none of those things offer any tactical advantage. They don't actually function as obstacles. So for Ukraine, this could be the start of a significant push forward as they start to roll up Russian defenders. And we're going to see in the coming weeks just what this looks like. But I would be very interested to see how things go from here. In terms of Russian activity, just 23 combat engagements across the front lines. It looks like 2 of which are counterattacks trying to defend this Novoprokhovka. Again, let's pull this up real quick. I really think that the core understanding here is when you look at the fortifications, because you can see that the eastern side, Novoprokhovka, is the one that connects to the larger fortification network, right? So if Russian forces can hold this trench line or these trenches, Ukraine is going to have a hard time rolling up these trench networks. In contrast, if Ukrainian forces are able to push into this trench work east and this trench work to the south, they're going to be able to just start to roll through. We've seen that once you're in a trench clearing is, it's hard to defend a trench once the enemy has entered it. And you could see literally this is a miles of unbroken trench line that Russia's going to have a really hard time mounting a meaningful, effective defense of it. Now, obviously, Ukraine's got some problems in these secondary positions, but you can see the secondary trenches are not always that close and that mutually supporting. In some cases, they are, right? Here's a secondary trench, here's a secondary trench, but in a lot of cases, there just isn't one, right? And I think the potential of this battle, which may not look significant because it's from a terrain perspective, doesn't look that important, but the ability to sort of get yourselves into Russian fortification networks, especially in the south here, I can't overstate the importance. Of course, we also have some level of Ukrainian success in Bakhmut, probably reflecting the liberation of Klitschivka. You can see Klitschivka here. I suspect probably pretty close to being entirely liberated in the near future. Even War Mapper tweeting while on vacation that Robotyne has been liberated. Guys, if you want to see some of the combat footage from the Robotyne battle, I'm going to be checking that out today. New videos dropping today on Combat Vet News. I can't even show you the thumbnails of these videos in the members only section because they're just so intense and sometimes so graphic. But that's where I do the analysis, the deep dives of the POV GoPro combat footage that I'll get demonetized or age restricted if I show them on YouTube. Patreon has booted me off, so Combat Vet News is the place to get that. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members only section as well as an exclusive room on the Discord. So definitely check out combatvetnews.com. Link is in the description or up here. Now moving on, what I thought was interesting is first off that allegedly Ukrainian forces actually conducted a small landing operation in Crimea. They described it as part of a successful operation, and it sounds more like almost a propaganda move, right? It seems like it was a small team that infiltrated the area at night. It looks like they destroyed some gear, maybe did some reconnaissance, maybe took out some high value targets, especially in an area that's like this, what looks like kind of a deployment point for maybe Russian naval forces or even supplies, right? You can see there's looks like maybe rail lines here. There's a helipad. So Ukrainian forces, right? Just asserting that they can and do operate in Crimea. And I think also telling Russian forces that, hey, don't start to pull your forces out of Crimea to shore up losses in Zaporizhzhia, because Ukrainian forces will show up here if you dare pull out forces. So again, just like the forces in Belgorod, I think we are seeing Ukraine deploy its forces where forcing Russia to spread its troops thinner and thinner, because if there's one thing we know about insurgent tactics, and there's one thing that I know as an Afghanistan veteran, it's that if an insurgents can operate somewhere one time, and that means the person on defense or on counterinsurgency has to operate there continuously, and it's a massive drain on resources. So, talking about the Institute for the Study of War, right? We covered, of course, the death of Prigozhin in a previous video. One thing I wanted to add that I thought was interesting that isn't really being talked about is that when Wagner made its march on Moscow, it was notorious. They didn't actually get into many firefights with Russian infantry troops or border guards, but they did shoot down a dozen planes, including at least one supposedly carrying high-level military officials. So I think there is some level of intentional by Putin poetic justice by shooting down Prigozhin's plane himself. I think that's part of the message that's being sent to Wagner. So just one fun little note. Of course, it sounds like Ukrainian forces were targeting a Russian air defense system in Crimea. This may be then preparatory for drone assaults, right? If you can take out an anti-aircraft missile system, it means that elsewhere in Crimea, they're going to be less able to take out drones or even combat aircraft. So this is a very common and regular use of special forces troops, and to suppress enemy air defenses, to ensure that select areas are clear of air defenses, enabling more deep strikes by air assets. So, anything else here? Not really. There is, again, some talk about this being the Robotyne breach being a breach of Russian defensive lines. I don't think we've seen the actual breach yet. But as Ukrainian forces, if they start to expand east and west at a increasingly rapid pace, we'll know that they've breached Russian trenches. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you. Thank you to our Colonel tier members. I know we've had a couple of new signups, and we're going to get you guys in here probably in the next day or two, as well as thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. And we have a big announcement today on the Discord. So if you're not a member, you won't be able to scoop that announcement a day early. So anyway, thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.